Hello, I want to welcome everyone to this webinar. We are excited to have you. My name is Reverend Adam Taylor. I have the honor of serving as president of Sojourners, and we are here to reflect together on America's 250 and what a faithful, prophetic Christian response can and should be to this milestone birthday that the United States is celebrating on July 4th and beyond. I know many of you are already deeply familiar with Sojourners. Some of you are newer to us. We are an organization that for over 50 years has been working to inspire and equip Christians across all traditions and often working with people of other faith traditions as well to put faith into action for justice and peace. I'm so grateful for our publication arm that has produced this incredible special issue that you're going to hear a lot about. And hopefully, many of you already have it. And if you don't, we definitely want to get you this content because this is an extremely timely and critical conversation. As the United States commemorates its 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we know that many Americans, many Christians, and many people of faith have very different emotions as they approach this major birthday. And we are particularly concerned and alarmed at the ways in which the Trump administration and the kind of MAGA movement more broadly has hijacked this birthday in a way that seeks to further reinforce a kind of Christian nationalist vision for this country. In some ways, this special issue is a real affirmation of our long arc of history. For some of you that know some of our own history as Sojourners, we started as a post-American, and our very first issue literally had a image, a picture of Jesus wrapped in an American flag. And so we have been resisting various mutations of Christian nationalism for over 50 years. And as we approach July 4th, I think it's really important for us to understand how important lament is as we think about what it means to commemorate this birthday. We also recognize there's lots of things to celebrate, but we want to do so in a way that reaffirms our commitment to some of those ideals that are worth celebrating, the commitment and ideal, the promise of liberty and justice for all. One of the things that I reflected on in a kind of opening column as a part of this special issue was that this birthday feels particularly fraught in a time when our democracy is under an incredible amount of stress and even assault. And yet, I think one of the greatest birthday presents we could be giving our nation is to rededicate ourselves to ensuring that not only do we protect and strengthen our democracy, but we ultimately transform it into the kind of inclusive, just, multiracial democracy that we know we desperately need and we know is aligned with our deepest held faith convictions. So you're going to hear a lot more about that and this broader theme over the course of this webinar. We're thrilled that you are with us. And I want to turn it over to my colleague, Matt, who's our Chief Operating Officer and our Chief Financial Officer, who's just going to share a word more about some of Sojourner's work.
Thanks, Adam. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I just want to reiterate that we believe this is a very important conversation to have, and we're really honored to have you here with us. As Adam just shared, Sojourner's June special issue explores the idea that America is not exceptional. America is not immune from the failures and contradictions faced by nations all over the world. But we believe that the future thriving of our nation and the people of the nation starts with real honesty about that. It requires us to tell truth about our history, our present, and the possibilities for our future, and an understanding that thriving is not going to come from an easy patriotism, nor will it come from cynical dismissal. And that conversation is not easy, and it's essential, and it is at the heart of Sojourner's mission. Your experience today and the journalism that inspired this webinar is made possible by people like you, people who believe that faith should help us engage the world with courage and, more importantly, with hope. If you find value in today's conversation or you've benefited from Sojourner's work over the years, I'd love to invite you to consider making a gift to Sojourners. Sojourners doesn't have the backing of billionaires. Instead, we have the faithful support of people like you, and your ongoing commitment to support Sojourners helps us continue to create spaces for thoughtful dialogue, independent journalism, and faithful action at a time when all three are desperately needed. You'll find a link in the chat to giving. But whether you choose to give or not today, we're really grateful that you're here to be a part of this important conversation. Adam, back to you.
Thanks, Matt. Well, I have the honor of introducing Betsy Shirley, who is our editor-in-chief. I really want to thank Betsy and the entire editorial team for the passion and creativity they put into the special issue, and they certainly do that across all of our issues of Sojourners magazine. But in this one in particular, and it was really their idea to create a special issue in light of the 250th, and then do so in a way that I think is incredibly both pastoral and prophetic. And so I'm excited to turn the program over to Betsy, who's going to kind of be the moderator for the rest of our time together.
Great. And thank you, Adam, for that warm introduction, and Matt for welcoming everyone. And thank you to all of you who are joining. There are real people who make this magazine, and we spend a lot of time thinking about what would be helpful, what would be inspiring, what would be challenging to people like us. And it's just so great, even though we can't see your faces, to see folks from the chat coming in from all over the place. And we hope one of the things you take away from this is that you are not alone. There are so many of us who are concerned about what's happening and who are taking action in our own ways and ready to work together. So I hope that leaves you with some inspiration. Magazines are group projects. There is a whole team, as Adam mentioned, who makes this. I am really excited to bring you a small sliver of some of the people who worked on the June issue, but just wanted to give thanks to all of the other editors, writers, fact checkers, designers, you name it, who make this issue possible. So let's talk about who we've got here today. First up is Carolyn Winfrey Gillette. She is the author of over 550 hymns. That's a lot of hymns. And her hymns are sung by thousands of congregations around the world. You can find them, of course, here at Sojourners, but also Christian Century, The New Yorker, NPR, and PBS. She and her husband, Bruce, are very recently retired, as in moving out their office yesterday, Presbyterian ministers, and they have served congregations in New York, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey. For this issue, we asked Carolyn if she could write a hymn for America's 250th birthday that would be one we would actually want to sing in church. The resulting hymn is called In This Time of Great Reflection, and it invites us to reconsider what we mean when we say America is a city on a hill. So check it out. Next up is Josina Guess, who is my colleague here at Sojourner. She's an associate editor, as well as a mother, a farmer, a community organizer in a small town near Athens, Georgia. She often writes at the intersection of ecology, race, history, and faith, and was previously a writer and managing editor for the Bitter Southerner. She is active in her local Quaker worship group. Josina's work on this issue, as is true for many of the editors, was on a bunch of different things. But one of the things Josina did was working with more than a dozen authors who contributed their prayers to the composite feature, which in the magazine is called Strangers in the Strange Land. It's got a different online title. So we'll hear more about that. Next up, we've got Kenji Kuramitsu, who has a dual vocation as an Episcopal priest and a clinical social worker and lives in Chicago. He is the author of a booklet of uncommon prayer, Collects for the Black Lives Matter movement and beyond, and his creative writing has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize in the Asian American Writers Workshop. In this issue, he wrote an essay titled God's Liberating Message for U.S. Christians. In it, he thinks about the American quest to see ourselves as exceptional as if it were embodied in a person in his therapy practice. And he articulates how letting go of this quest for preferential treatment might actually heal us. So glad to have you here, Kenji. Darren St. Ulysses is another associate editor of Sojourners magazine. If you are a magazine subscriber, and if you're not, there's my gentle pitch. You may know Darren as the author of our weekly From the Editor's newsletter, which arrives in your inbox every Wednesday. In addition to his work at Sojourners, Darren is a talented musician for various worshiping communities in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, an academic tutor, and a board member at the Peacemakers Coalition. For this issue, Darren was both an editor for Kenji's piece, so they worked together to shape that. Darren also wrote his own piece, which was provocatively titled, We Need More Flags in Church. Please don't throw anything. Read the article. It's great. Check it out. And that describes his own experience growing up in churches with strong immigrant roots. And last, but not least, we are joined by Jamar Tisby, who is a New York Times bestselling author, historian, and the founder of Tisby Media, an organization dedicated to creating truth-telling content at the intersection of faith, race, and justice. You can follow his work on his Substack. In this issue, he challenges his inner expertise as a historian to make the case for why Christians need to concern ourselves with telling truer histories about our nation. Histories that don't leave out the painful things, as well as the histories that shine a light on the generations of Christians whose faith has sparked them to help this country live up to its founding ideals. We don't really do applause on webinars, but thanks to all our panelists for joining, and I'm giving a warm virtual applause in my heart. All right, let's get into it. I have cooked up here what I think humbly are some good questions, but I will invite anyone who is listening in to share their questions of their own from using Zoom's Q&A feature, which you should find at the bottom of the screen. If you can't find it or Zoom's giving you trouble, we've all been there. You can just go ahead and drop it in the chat, and my colleague Heather Brady can help figure that out. We will take some time at the end for questions. There's always more that we would want to ask and add, but we'll do our best to get as many in as we can. So I want to spend most of our time today talking about alternatives. Those of us who are here, if you've read our special issue, oh, and I meant to Vanna White it here for you. Ta-da! If you've seen the issue, my guess is that you are already well aware of what are some of the problems. But I think it's good to be as clear as possible about the problems we see so that we can talk more productively about the solution. So this is my challenge to the panelists. In one sentence, what would you say most concerns you about the way many folks are celebrating this nation's 250th anniversary? And, I know this is hard to fit in one sentence, what would you like to see in its place? So what concerns you about the way some of the 250th anniversaries celebrations are going, and what would you like to see instead? And I will let the panelists jump in.
I have so many thoughts about what's frustrating. That part's easy to name. I'll just be super specific. I am really fed up with the White House's and the State House's partnership with PragerU, which is a right-wing content mill propagandizing and mythologizing history. And what I'd like to see it replaced with is more accurate history, particularly in churches and faith communities.
Thanks, Jamar.
As a writer, I'm really concerned that some of the people who are talking about our country are using superlatives, saying we're the best, the brightest, the strongest, the smartest, the richest. And I would like to see us be thankful and use more words that are aspirational, what we hope to become, just and peaceful and welcoming and kind and merciful and good neighbors.
Thank you, Carolyn. Yeah, it's great.
Both Jamar and myself, Jamar, if I may, quoted from Frederick Douglass's speech, and I share his concerns about the impiety, bombast, fraud, deception, and hypocrisy marking these celebrations. I would love to see, different cultures have different names for it, in the recovery movement, making amends. In Hawaii, we would say ho'oponopono, making it right, making repair, kind of taking account in this way.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kenji.
I'm gonna do one more sentence than Betsy asked for, but as somebody who often isn't in spaces, church spaces that care all that much about the 250th anniversary, I grew up and often am in Black church and immigrant church context. I would like to see a lot more thoughtfulness in approaching this particular celebration, not just, oh wow, this arrived, but actual thoughtfulness as to how to approach this. That would be what I would like to see. That what I don't see is that, and that frustrates me, and I would like to see it replaced with some actual thoughtfulness.
Thanks, Darren. Appreciate it.
I'd say it grieves me that Douglas's words are still so relevant today, particularly his critique of the Christianity of this land compared to the Christianity of Christ. And it makes me sad that, what I'd like to see would be humility, truth-telling, confession. Those are all kind of core parts of Christian identity, and they should be part of this. A birthday is just a celebration of years. 250 years is where we're at. Let's take a look at where we're at and see where we're going. So.
Well, thank you guys for accepting the challenge and for giving such thoughtful answers. Let's jump in and try to figure out how we can do some of those things and be people who work towards more thoughtful, towards repair, towards more truthfulness. So, as the US marks 250 years, if I were to walk out of my house down the street a little towards the White House, there's all this merchandise that's available about America 250, talking about and it's trying to tell the national story. Here's, God bless America since 1776. And as we were putting this issue together, quite a number of our authors made the case that we need to tell a truer story or a more accurate history. And Jamar, I'm going to pick on you first. You're a historian, and your article tackles this directly. And I wondered if you can zoom out a little bit and tell us in short, why does getting this history right matter? In other words, there's lots of shenanigans going on. Why should we as Christians, who aren't most of us, I assume, historians, care about the way our national story is told?
Well, if you're a Christian who cares about the Bible, then you should care about history. In many ways, scripture is a record of the past in general. I mean, the events have happened a long, long time ago. And so in a very straightforward way, it is telling us about what happened. But it goes beyond that. There's a command to remember. Over and over again in scripture, you get the command to remember the deeds of the Lord. Remember the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt. And there's a reason for that, is because anytime the people of God forget their past, that's when they stray into idolatry and injustice. And so there's a real moral pull to remember the past accurately, so that we might act justly today. So that's one reason. There's a theological backing for remembering history. I think another reason is identity. History is identity. It is the story we tell about ourselves and about who we believe we are. So it then gives you the framework for what is possible, for who you should be, for who you've been in the past. And what I'm concerned about is we have a group of people in power who say that our national identity means that our best days are behind us.
Mm.
And what we have to do is go back to a time when we were great. That cuts off imagination, and it says you have to sanitize the past because the past has to look pretty in order for people to want to go back to it. So what I hope these articles and this beautifully done special edition of the magazine do is remind us that whoever controls the story about the past has a major influence on our identity, our national identity. And if we can be more honest about that identity, then we can be not only more honest about the failures, but also more creative about a future that we can form when we learn the lessons of the past.
Preach it, as many in the chat said. Beautifully done. Anyone else want to jump in? Great. I'm going to keep moving. We've got lots to cover, but we'll come back to this. So let's build on what Jamar just said. If the goal is to tell this better history, if those who control the story, impact what we can imagine for the future, what are some creative ways that all of us here, panelists, folks listening included, can be part of that work? What are the stories you'd like to tell, and what are some ways we can do that? When we say, hey, we need to be part of shaping a better narrative, what does that look like in real life?
I'd like to see the stories of all of our neighbors told more. Um, not just the narrative of, um, you know, well, white Christian nationalism, but the stories of our immigrant neighbors and all kinds of neighbors who live in our communities and in our land, and just make sure that all their stories are shared and normalized as part of this is who we are. Not just these are outsiders, we'll listen to them a little bit, but these are all our stories together.
Carolyn, I wonder if that's something when you're writing hymns that I don't know, do you see that as part of this telling a more full story?
I think I do, and I think that's what Jesus did in his teaching. And as I write hymns, I try to look at the scripture texts, often the lectionary texts or ones that people might be preaching on, and I try to look at the inclusiveness and the welcome of Jesus as I'm writing hymns. I want that part of the story to be told.
I can share about some of the work I do here in Chicago in leading these race, place, and faith walking tours of two particular neighborhoods on the South Side, the Hyde Park and Kenwood neighborhoods, in which I have family history and are very important to the South Side of Chicago. And communities of faith have deeply engaged around race and around identity. I actually pulled a picture of my friend Derek, who passed away a few years ago. He and I started these tours together. I keep a picture on my bookshelf here with our friend Joy, and I've continued to offer these since his passing. We explore how every neighborhood, but this neighborhood in particular, is a haunted house implicated with U.S. histories of race, of migration, of displacement. And we talk about the role of faith communities in advancing a more just future in relationship to the land. So, similarly to how pilgrimages may travel to places like Palestine or former concentration camp sites, or, and really have civil rights history in the American South, and have a transformative travel experience. Something that we try to talk about in the history of our walking tours is to say, everywhere you are in this land has a story connected to this broader narrative. And how can we teach it? How can we talk about it in a time when it's really being intentionally erased? So even though we're just walking in circles in the neighborhood, we talk about it sometimes like making little revolutions, if you will, going around, but trying to teach more faithfully. And it's really made an impact on folks in a small way.
I love that so much. I'm also just a nerdy walking tour enthusiast. All right, so we've got a couple different ways on the table so far. We can sing hymns, we can tell the stories of our neighbors, we can learn the stories of our local neighborhoods and be part of telling those stories, and we can even walk out and see the places. What else do we want to add to this bouquet of ways we can respond?
I'll add doing things with youth and children. Like there's a summer camp that I helped to found that had a week last week called Movers and Makers Camp, where the kids learned about their community, met people who are making a change locally, people who are, courageously made changes throughout history, and just learning that they can be change makers in their community is super important. And I just think all of us can yeah, know that there are children currently being indoctrinated in this alternate narrative, and that the work that freedom schools were doing in the 60s is still really essential now to be helping this next generation get to know each other, get to know nonviolent communication, and get to be part of a future that we can look forward to. Oops, wrong button.
Great ideas. Work with kids, kind of the freedom school tradition, nonviolent communication, great things. What else do we want to add?
I just want to say the church got to get in on this. And there's a million ways to do it. But since we're talking about America 250 and we're looking back at the past, let's teach history in church. So, in general, people in the United States have a very shallow understanding of history. And by the way, my little soapbox here is I cannot tell you how many times when I mention a historical event or fact, people are like, I know this. No, you don't. What you mean when you say, I know this is I've heard of this, but you don't know the details. You haven't looked back at the historical actors. You haven't looked at the primary sources. You don't have a detailed understanding that would actually help you glean wisdom from what we've been through. Instead, you're like, oh, I heard of that event. I already know whatever I need to know, and they move on. But I digress. In general, people in the United States have a terrible understanding of the past. I would say that's even worse in the church because we have so many leaders of faith communities of all kinds who themselves don't know history, don't prioritize it, and then nature abhors a vacuum. It's not as if you just remain a blank slate. That gets filled in by misinformation and disinformation. And you can be sure that folks on the right wing are filling their churches, their pews with information they prefer to tell about the past. Therefore, they are shaping identity. Therefore, they are shaping the contours of power. And there are so many churches that are left out of it. How do you do that? There's a myriad ways from book studies to screening documentaries to just making sure that your pastor has a bunch of history books on their shelf to draw from as they create teaching materials. But I do think that it is incumbent upon people of faith and faith communities in particular to take up the charge, to do what Darren said, be really thoughtful about going in to not just the 4th of July and America 250, sort of the peak of this propaganda, but the rest of the year and what this regime is doing with history in general.
Amazing. Historians for social justice. And you're right, I have not heard a lot of effort in churches to really go into history. It's, we talk about theology, we talk about ethics, we talk about the Bible, and not often our own history. So great. All right, I'm going to keep going, but this whole chat is basically what are the different ways to respond. So as other things come to you, Adam in. One of the ways we tried to tell a truer story in this issue is through the collection of prayers that you lovingly curated, Josina. And that's a big task. Curating short bits of text, though you might think they're shorter, they're easier. It's a challenge to get them all in and to get a good variety. And so, Josina, I wondered if you could just take folks a little bit behind the scenes about what kind of prayers we wanted to offer and how you went about gathering them.
Okay, first I want to shout out our graphic designer, Nate, who's not here, who actually had the challenge of getting them to physically fit. Like I was like, here's the words, and then he had to be the one to make them physically fit on the page and not, I mean, I got to give him some like my input to be like, I want it to be like a patchwork quilt. There's got to be some symmetry and some, there was some like visual consulting around it. But yeah, it was definitely a collaborative thing. And even just the prayers themselves, when we came up with the idea, the whole team just brainstormed names of people that we thought, who would we want to pray? Whose prayers would we want to hear? Whose prayers might be missing, or definitely would be missing from the White House's prayer page. So I spent some time. I don't actually go to the White House website very often, but I spent some time looking at that, which was weird, and saw what was missing, and also really wanted to be sure that this wasn't like it's easy to be kind of snarky, but I really wanted this to be prayer and to know that like prayer is powerful and prayer unites and prayer does things beyond what we can imagine, and to make sure that this wasn't centering the White House narrative or centering that bombast, but to really center a call on God to be with us in this moment. And so once we kind of narrowed down who we might want, we found whose email addresses we had. We found people who replied, those who didn't reply, those who were too busy and said, I can't do it, but I'm glad you're doing it. And so what was exciting was once the invitations went out, they were very basic, like just pray, like I want a prayer of your heart. And there was a few sort of curated, like maybe you might want to do the subversive Thanksgiving or a list of possible ideas, and people would say, oh, I want to do that, or I want to do that. It was just sort of like a a potluck. I like organizing potlucks, and it was like a prayer potluck. And people replied really quickly, which was great just to see how eager and excited folks were and how creative and different they were. And like I was especially pleased with I was pleased with all of them. I mean, it was just such a fun thing. But like Julia Alvarez wrote me back with a blank screen. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And then she wrote back, I wasn't going to write back, but then I wrote back and this is what I wrote. And like if you haven't read her prayer, it's like, I don't want to pray. I'm tired of praying. And I was like, this is perfect. And so I love the rawness, the immediacy, the variety. And, I do hope that people will find it as a useful tool for their personal and collective worship. So, yeah. And also, yeah. And then we also had a conversation around expanding it to be both ecumenical, but also interfaith and conversations around the US, like the myth of the US being a Christian nation, and even like just acknowledging when we were brainstorming the magazine, one idea had been like a timeline of religious history of the US, acknowledging Jewish and Islamic roots and indigenous religious practices. And we couldn't fit it all in, but at least in the prayers, we could acknowledge the history of this country has always been a tapestry of many faiths. So that's where we landed.
Well, thanks, Josina. To you and all the contributors for giving us some words of like, how do we actually physically, what are words we can say to God as we process this? I want to talk about flags for a second. I counted up this morning, and I think there are about 7 different pages in this issue with American flags, which is a lot for us at Sojourners. And we thought really carefully about when we use the American flag, both as a symbol in the magazine and, as a symbol that crops up in churches and culture. And there were many articles in this issue that touched on this, but in a very fun way, there was this parallel conversation between Kenji's article and Darren's, which both talk directly about flags and say kind of different, though not necessarily conflicting things. So I wanted to start with Kenji and Darren and say, what are your attitudes towards flags, and what role, if any, do they play in your civic and religious life?
I'm looking to my editor. It's really fascinating. Our pieces were in conversation. I was offered the flag, or I thought about the flag image in my article when I got feedback, really helpful feedback from my editor of like, okay, this is great theory. This is very intellectual. What's a personal story? And I thought, how can I relate to American Christian nationalism, American supremacy, exceptionalism? And I thought about, the relationships I had with the flag from growing up in Boy Scout camp and learning to fold it and crease it. I wrote almost like an origami master and not letting it touch the ground, as Darren also wrote. Or, I thought about this moment of which I wrote where I'm in the cemetery and the soldiers handing me the flag as we hand them our grandfather to inter him in the military cemetery in Hawaii. And, not being ready to receive it and then feeling, oh my gosh, I'm holding this nuclear football baby that I love and hate. And, it's the cover of Sojourners issue is not a flag on fire. It's a tiny flag. It's so I think I have room in my own piety for everything from people who say, I want nothing to do with the flag. It symbolizes only oppression. I think I'm often there. But, maybe when I slow down, I actually do have a more tender relationship to this thing, almost like the feeling you have when you find out a mentor has betrayed other people or harmed you in some way, or someone that there was an exploitation in a relationship you didn't know about. So there's, I personally am a bit allergic to the American flag. There may be, allergy shots or something I could get and change my views over time. I even guest preached in a church last week with an American flag in the back, which was a first for me. But I think the image of the flag and the emotions that we pour into it is such a powerful thing to explore. And I just finally want to say, like, the concern I hear from folks in my family and some in my community of the sanctity of the flag. Sometimes I get really cynical about it. Like, there are human beings who have been burned. who are being burned, who we're funding the destruction of. And I want us to get much more upset about that than the cloth we imbue with such value.
Perfectly said. Yeah.
Yeah,
Fair.
and absolutely. I first of all loved getting to watch the process of wait. There's an incredible story here that Kenji ended up telling, and if you haven't read the beginning of Kenji's essay and reading the entirety of his essay, you definitely should, because that story ties everything together in such a beautiful sort of way. I, like Kenji, am also similarly allergic to the a lot of instances where the American flag shows up. You see, it just made Kenji sneeze. He was so allergic. But I and if you're a subscriber to the magazine, you're going to, if you get the emails that I normally send out, today is going to be a little bit of a story of me just this week entering into a church building and seeing an American flag at the front of it and being like, don't you know what country you're in? I feel like you kind of know that you're in the United States of America. You don't need to reiterate to your own selves that you are. On the other hand, what I knew was that this issue was going to be released during the World Cup. I knew that this was going to be a time when a lot of us were going to be gathering in various places in the country. And my dad is currently en route from North Carolina to Georgia to watch Haiti participate in a match today. And one of the things that ends up happening is you will see, as the Ghanaians have done and many times when they tied England yesterday, and through many different in many different countries, you're going to see a lot of flags show up. And for whatever the reason, I had to ask myself, why does it hit differently when I see it from in a Japanese flag? Why does it hit differently when I see another flag that isn't the United States flag? And allergic as I may be to the actual reality of the United States standing in the way that it is, I think one of the things that I've been challenged on, and this is what I wrote about in my piece, is maybe the problem is that it actually stands alone too often and not in conversation with other flags, as it will in soccer matches, as it has to. It's not just you sing the American anthem, but also Paraguay. You're going to hear their anthem at the same time. What does it look like to have these things in conversation with each other? And so when it comes to telling better stories, when it comes to how do we end up learning to hear different stories, more true stories about our present, about our future, one way is just to listen. And sometimes listening requires that you put some other thing in conversation with you so that you're not the only one speaking, but you can listen to other people who also have a story to say. And I think having the benefit of multiple flags is that you can have that conversation. So that's what I was hoping to convey. And I think this issue did that in a lovely way.
Love that. And I really appreciated both of your perspectives, and also that too, like, hey, we are all Christians who are committed to social justice. And as Kenji said, there's some room for different feelings here. But I was particularly struck by your piece, Darren, because when I first saw the headline, which was something to the effect of we need more flags in church, I was like, we're putting this in our magazine? What? I was looking at the draft. But you did such a nice job explaining, just a bunch of American flags that would certainly look a certain way, but when it's one flag among many, it changes it. So I appreciate your, I don't know, being willing to kind of challenge my own biases on that. So thank you. Lots of great stuff happening in the chat. I've been trying to keep track, but I'm going to let my colleague Heather keep her eye on that. Sorry, and did I cut anyone off? Was anyone else want to jump in there on flags?
I just want to mention that there is an official Juneteenth flag, And a lot of people get it confused because they're using the Pan-African flag instead of the Juneteenth flag. And even within the Black community, there's a lot of debate and conversation. I still think we're trying to figure out how we commemorate and honor this holiday on a national basis now that's been made a federal holiday. But the Pan-African flag, stems from the first quarter of the 20th century, and the Universal Negro Improvement Association, headed by Marcus Garvey, came up with the flag, and the colors are red, black, and green, and it stands for the African diaspora globally. And so it's a symbol meant to unite all African descended people, no matter where they are. But the Juneteenth flag, and particularly the colors, are red, white, and blue. And I think that really matters because Juneteenth is a specifically Black American commemoration of emancipation from race-based chattel slavery. And specificity does not mean exclusivity. So my argument is that let Juneteenth stand as a way to honor and commemorate that specific history. It doesn't mean the histories of other African peoples don't matter. It means that on this specific day, it is referencing this specific event on June 19th, 1865, when enslaved Black people learned of their emancipation in Galveston, Texas. So the designers of the flag intentionally incorporated the colors of the U.S. flag as a subversive act of belonging. It was a declaration in a symbol to say, for all these years, you have counted us as property, not people. You have counted us as laborers, not citizens. And what we're doing with this flag is saying, no, we are truly Americans, in a way more truly American than those who would stray from its stated ideals, more truly American than people who came decades or centuries after we got here, and because of the color of their skin, were folded into a white/American identity. But it's really not saying we're above those people. It's saying we belong as much as any of those groups. And so I think there are certain symbols that we shouldn't cede so easily to the far right or to white Christian nationalists. And it's not that you have to love everything about the flag or what it represents. It is simply to say that this other side doesn't get complete ownership of it, doesn't get to completely define what it means. Because the reality is, we're all in this national boat together. And so I get to fight for what I think the nation means just as much as you do.
Betsy, if I can just add to a thought that came up as Jamar, you were sharing, the only national anthem that stirs emotion, and I stand and I put my hand on my chest, is James Weldon Johnson's "Lift Every Voice and Sing," the Black national anthem. Like, there is an inclusivity in the specificity, as you say, Jamar, that I can appreciate.
Great point.
Great. It reminds me a little bit, the challenge of many of us who are Christians and who feel many of the symbols of our own faith have been appropriated to support things that we're like, whoa, I don't think that's what Jesus meant. And we want to kind of say, no, we're not letting you take the cross. We're not letting you, take the Bible. There's ways this can be liberative. So appreciate you raising that.
And I'll just pipe in real quick. I love that we're promoting Sojourners' work. There's an essay that came to mind from the Oxford American that is one of the most powerful, essays about the flag that touched me about, y'all can read it if you want. I'm gonna just put the link in, but it's by Karen Good Marable, and it's about a Black veteran holding the flag. And it really helped me. So yeah.
Thanks, Justine. Pivoting slightly, though we're still kind of in the same neighborhood. Kenji, in your essay, I was really struck by how you kind of talk about American exceptionalism as a collective psychological coping strategy and kind of talk to it as if it were embodied in someone you might be seeing in a therapy practice. And you say this tick kind of protects us from painful realities and including our own insecurity, our own national tendency towards violence. And I'm curious what your therapy practice, what your expertise as someone involved with mental health can offer us. If it can help us kind of diagnose the problem, can it help us, what do you do to let go of hubris, to let go of insecurity and things that are coming out in unproductive coping strategies?
Yeah, I really, and thank you, Betsy, for suggesting the framing for the piece. I thought it was such an interesting, thing to think about. And as a psychotherapist, to be able to write in this way was so meaningful. Um, I think our defenses, are so powerful and we use them so much because they work. Like narcissism works, alcoholism works, compartmentalization works. They're very effective at accomplishing what they set out to do, which is keeping us far from painful realities or feelings, minimizing those, keeping them from affecting us. Of course, they work in quotes like to a degree that begins to extract a really high cost, and to alienate us from our own professed values, often to create disharmony and rupture in our lives and relationships. So, like, we obviously move there. I'm not just working with patients and saying, keep doing what you're doing. It sounds like it's great, but like, no, like these things, we come by them honestly. And that was my hypothesis for American narcissism, American cultural supremacy. Like, it probably works really well at insulating us from realities that are really disturbing, like that we incarcerate more people than any country in the world, like that our own history is born in blood. I guess I was playing with this idea of like working with a patient or a client who presented with this really like puffed up sense of self. Although in the wild, they would probably like be sent to therapy by a partner or a parent or a significant other. They're probably not on their own, like thinking they have a problem necessarily. But I just want to say two things about this. One is when we're working with someone, a person or a church or a culture or a country that really thinks it's better than everyone else and needs that punctured a little bit, that behavior can be so noxious. Um, think about like some of the stars you've seen on reality TV whose behavior really puts you off, or the reality TV politics we live in now. That behavior can be so offensive that it can be hard to have a point of empathy, and that's essential. So like I offered that in my piece of saying like it actually really breaks my heart when I can get past my disgust and anger and hatred when I hear Trump saying when he's 70 years old, asked by a reporter, what would your father have made of your successful run for president? And the first thing he says is, oh, he would have absolutely allowed me to do it, unselfconsciously, apparently unironically. Like, I can't find a lot of points of empathy for some of the titans of misery in our world, the Musks, the Trumps, whatever, but some of the things they had to, so having that point of empathy, I think is one thing I would say. And then maybe working with someone to help them understand that their behavior is not in alignment with their professed values. Like if you always need to be above someone else or playing the one up, one down game, you're not actually able to have equals and kinship relationships. That's a part of what God is calling us to have in Christ with others. So I think trying to highlight that discrepancy with firmness, with compassion, with tact, is kind of an approach I would take. And then, just to help folks see that embracing these ideologies of strength and of aggression, like Christian Zionism, toxic masculinity, Christian nationalism, these things are really papering over vulnerability. So how can we create enough of a sense of safety where those protective walls don't have to be as rigid?
Ooh, a challenging word, but also one that sounds a lot like Jesus. It's very hard to find empathy for the people you described so nicely there as titans of all that is wrong in the world, or that who we portray that way. But yeah, that is hard. All right, I'm going to do one more question, and then we are going to turn to the lively crop of questions that you guys have been faithfully sharing in the Q&A. Philippians 4:8 instructs followers of Jesus to think about things that are true, noble, right, pure, lovely, admirable, excellent, and praiseworthy. Thank you to my middle school Bible class for making me memorize that verse. I'm guilty of this myself, but sometimes I feel that in the Christian social justice world, we are so laser focused, and rightly so, on saying what's wrong that we forget to talk about, hey, there are positive examples of people who are doing the work. And so I wanted to end my line of questions with, what is one example from history, and that could be recent history or far back history, that you want to pull up that you find instances of God at work in this complicated, messy, always imperfect, not exceptional nation?
So I've got not just one example, but a whole book of examples. um,
Hey!
my latest book is called The Spirit of Justice: True Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance. And if folks have read The Color of Compromise, which is essentially about white Christians behaving badly, this is the flip side of the coin about people empowered by their faith to work for justice. And I'll be straight up with you, this is my lowest selling book. Why might that be? Kenji could probably speak to this from a psychotherapy aspect, but we're drawn to the negative headlines. If it bleeds, it leads. We are drawn to the salacious, and that moves units, right? That sparks interest. But when it comes to the people, and we really do have this great cloud of historical witnesses who, no matter how dark the circumstances, found ways not just to see the light, but to be the light. That's what keeps me going. People always ask me, like, what gives you hope? I opened the book with Myrlie Evers, who, if that name sounds familiar, is because her husband Medgar Evers was killed in their driveway.
Mm.
This is part of the importance of studying the past is empathy, because when you actually get into the stories, can you imagine being a mother of young children? You hear a gunshot, your children drop to the floor as they've been trained because the threat of violence was so real and clear and present. And you, as the spouse, go out to see your beloved spouse bleeding in the driveway with a handful of t-shirts that say Jim Crow must go. Later, of course, Medgar dies. Later, Myrlie Evers writes that she contemplated suicide,
Mm.
that things had gotten so dark for her, but she doesn't. She continues to live. She moves her family out to California. She gets involved in politics. She brings the NAACP, which her husband worked for in the 1960s. By the 1990s, it had fallen into disrepute and was on the brink of bankruptcy. She uses her moral power and her public platform to be on the board of trustees and bring it back from the brink.
Mm.
And she has a lifetime of activism. And I'll end with this quote, which is in the first chapter of the book. A journalist asked her, how does now in the 21st century compare to the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s in terms of what we were facing with racism? And she said, I've been seeing things now that I hoped I'd never see again. Talking about negativism from the highest places. Trump is the president at this point. And I fully expected her to just end there and be like, now it's up to y'all. I'm passing the baton. She was 85, and this is back in 2017. And by the way, she's still alive. So the past isn't that long ago.
Mm.
But then she does something I'll never forget. And I was in the room when she said it. She said, but there's something about the spirit of justice that rises up like a war horse that's been put out to pasture. And then it hears this bell. I like to say the bell of freedom. And all of a sudden, the back becomes straight and the neck becomes stiff, and you become determined all over again. And I sat back and I said, whoa, what manner of woman is this? How? Seeing her husband assassinated in her driveway, does she still have the energy, the hope, the determination to continue the struggle for justice? And I think part of the way that we have that today is to realize that the spirit of justice is not just historical, it's not just in the past, and it's not just reserved for this heroic few. It's for all of us right now. And the way we access that is to learn the stories of the people who came before us and how they persevered in the midst of injustice and oppression, and how we might become inspired and imaginative to do the same in our day.
Wow. Thank you.
When I think about how God is working in this country and how that is happening in wonderful ways, I think a lot about issues of immigration, and I know there's some horrible things going on from people in positions of power with immigration right now. But I've talked to a number of immigrants over the years from Ghana, from Afghanistan, from Haiti, from a number of different places, people that we've worked with in our churches, people that we've really gotten to know as friends. And what has struck me is that they tell stories of how grateful they are for the welcome that they've received. And I'm not talking about on the level of the powers and principalities, but on the level of people in neighborhoods um, people in small towns, people in churches, just reaching out with a welcome. And I think God is definitely working in that. We can complain about what's being done wrong in that area, but in terms of many ordinary people just welcoming their neighbors who move into their town, there are great things happening, and people being welcomed into churches and people being welcomed into neighborhoods. And I think God is definitely at work in that, and we learn from each other as we welcome one another.
I'll give one more, and then we're going to pivot to some questions. But go for it if you're getting ready to.
Okay, quickly, the Lucille Clifton poem I closed my article with, she says, won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model born in Babylon, non-white and woman. And she ends it, won't you celebrate with me? Every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And that feels like something God is doing in the world and in our land that is worth celebrating.
Ooh. You inadvertently set up one of the questions we've got so perfectly, so I'll just go with that. Take it as Spirit's leading. This is a question from Trevor. It says, many people are looking for celebration and hope on an anniversary. What celebration, if any, would you include in a service, and how? Great question. Anyone want to take a crack? It's a tricky one. I'm thinking of how in my church, when we have All Saints Day, we have this really creative litany where we talk about here are all the different justice heroes, people who, because of their faith, kind of our own version, Jamar, of your book of saying, like, look, here are people whose stories give us courage. I am not someone who works in a parish or individual congregation, but if I were trying to come up with a celebration, I would say, like, who are these figures we could lift up? Right after Trump was elected for the second time, I was talking to a pro-democracy organizer and just being really frank, like, hey, what's my role as an editor at a publication that cares about social justice? What should we be doing? How should I be leading the team? She was really thoughtful, and she's like, you're going to want to tell the stories of the things that break. You're going to want to tell as things go wrong, you're going to want to document it, which is true. When things are bad, we want to be like, hey, guys, there's a problem. We want to let our readers know. She's like, but as much as possible, try to tell the stories of people taking courageous action together. And how can we tell the stories of, because it's contagious, right? When I hear, wow, this is how this woman responded, this is how this community responded, it makes it feel less abstract. It makes it feel less like, well, those were the people in the civil rights movement. They had something special. They were touched, and like I don't have what it takes. It makes it. That's my own. Anyone else want to chime in on how you might work a celebration of some kind?
I think the reason I paused is because it was specifically like church focused, right? So I'm not sure how overt I would be about something like the 4th of July in church, right? I would never fly a US flag in the sanctuary, at least alone, to your point, Darren. But there's a sense in which it's simple but not easy. Because what are we dealing with? It's what historians have to deal with every single subject. There's no perfect subject. There's no one besides Jesus who's never made a mistake or hurt someone or a bad decision, right? And it's simple in the sense, if you've ever loved someone, you have experience with this because you have to love people who are imperfect. And so how do you do that? What does it look like to honor who they are, to celebrate who they are, but also to hold them accountable for the ways they have hurt others or failed or been part of oppression? That's the same thing we're doing with the nation. And we have a special opportunity to do it on the 250th anniversary. I think the people who actually love their nation the most are the ones who hold it up to critique and scrutiny. And so I think what needs to happen in the church is that we teach our people to do that. It's too often one extreme or the other. You either love everything about the United States or you hate everything about the United States. And the truth is neither of those. The truth is it's been an incredible beacon for people globally about what democracy can look like. And we're like, oh, well, democracy here sucks. It doesn't work. No, it's far from perfect, but it's a lot better than what a lot of people around the globe have. And I don't think that should be controversial to say. At the same time, it ought not to be controversial to say this nation was built on blood. It was built on land theft and genocide and labor exploitation. And it's not just historical, it has present day impacts. So I think it's really about discipling people. So it's not really about the 4th of July or 1 week or 1 year or one occasion. It's about a long sort of historical curriculum, a discipleship that teaches people how you deal with an entity, whether an individual or a whole nation that has both darkness and light.
I'm sneaking one more question in here, and then we'll close it. And the question is, hey, from Andy, but that was kind of mirrored by several other folks and said, okay, like I hear it, we want to tell better stories. How are some creative ways we can get people to these programs? How do you help? I think what I hear in that question is like, how do we make history more appealing? And so I'd be curious for just kind of quick thoughts from those of you here who are clearly so passionate on the topic.
I'll jump in very briefly here and give you something extremely concrete. Do a screening of our short documentary, Jesus Was a Migrant. It is it includes history and it connects it to the present. That's how you make history feel appealing to people who don't already understand the importance of history, connected to something that's happening right now. And so what we do is we put forth the people who are being affected by these pernicious immigration policies. And you can go to, I'll drop the link in the chat, but you can go to jesuswasamigrant.com. You can watch the trailer. You can learn more about the film. And the idea is that you wouldn't just go to YouTube and watch it on your own, but that you would have a group event. Because when's the last time we saw a Christian film that actually made us sit back and ponder, how do I make the world a better place because of what I just saw? And not just, oh, I feel better about life and whatever. So screen
Great.
Jesus Was a Migrant.
Host a screening, and if your church is like my church, offer free food. Okay, what else? Other ideas to make history more appealing, and then we'll close it down.
Yeah, I'll just be brief. Andy, I think there's a reason that, genealogy is perhaps the second most popular activity on the internet, which is that we all have a story and folks appreciate learning about their histories, about their stories. In the Apostle Paul's language, there's a grafted onto-ness that newer migrants have coming to this nation. But also folks who have come here in all sorts of different ways or who have been here, or, we're all a part of that story somehow. So like the way, I'm seeing the question, it's sort of like, how do I pitch history to disinterested white folks in my church? I guess my reframing or way of thinking about it is like, how can we help folks to see that we really are all connected, all of our stories in this profound, not only national history, but salvation history. And so I think, as others have said, using multimedia or neighborhood or local specific offerings like walking tours or, being in conversation with texts, I think those are all ways to invite folks into that without kind of shame or condemnation.
Great.
Awesome.
I'd say let people sing songs in church, sing hymns. There are a lot of songs we sing to God, we praise God, but help people sing the love of neighbor, not just love of God as Jesus taught, but love of neighbor. And there are a ton of hymns out there, a number I've written, but other people have written too, that encourage people to care for the outcast, the stranger, the immigrant, the people who have been put down and oppressed, and just to care for each other as neighbors. Teach people to love neighbors, but do it in song, because what people sing really gets into them, into their hearts in a way, and into their lives that sometimes spoken words can't do.
Also, I just want to shout out the interview with Peter On here, who's the pastor of Olivet Covenant Presbyterian Church in Philly, who used a community art space to reflect on history, the importance of Juneteenth. And this was a Korean pastor in a denomination and a community that was not majority Black, but that was learning about Juneteenth, learning about Black history, and creating public art together. So I just think it's really exciting when you hear how people can embrace the whole narrative of American history and in their church space. And so.
Terrific. I know we could probably keep going with so many ideas. Want to be respectful of time. Thank you for those who are able to stay. We will be sending a recording of this out to you. I know my colleague Heather has dropped a bunch of links in the chat. We'll try to capture anything. Thank you all. And thank you for your faith that we are not consigned to just watch what's happening as the nation celebrates this anniversary and feel bad about it. There's stuff we can do. There's stuff people already are doing, and we get to join in and do that work together. So thank you all, and thank you to the panelists for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.